Welcome to Where I Lay My Hat, a podcast about home. This week's a little different, and I'm excited to speak with Ayo Haynes, who is an open adoption success coach and a real advocate for open adoption. She's been a trailblazer and an advocate for single women in pursuing motherhood, which is a really unique perspective to the show, and I think gives a nice lens on what home means to people who may not come from traditional family structures. So I'm really, really excited to have Ayo on the call today. So Io, thanks for joining us. And I'd love to start with you kind of giving us a little bit of your background and introducing yourself.
Yes, thank you for having me. So, as you said, my name is Ayo Haynes. I'm an open adoption specialist. I help women in their 40s and 50s become mothers through adoption. Some may have never been mothers before. Some may have had children that are grown and they have decided to adopt again. But it's a wonderful business of helping other people achieve their dreams. And you see little miracles happen every single day almost.
Awesome. That's lovely. And I think it is a very worthy thing to do. And I think, it's one of those things where there's a lot of people who may not have the privilege that some of us have had growing up in that standard nuclear family, which, to be fair, and mine was very privileged, but not everyone's standard nuclear family is actually as privileged as perhaps we make out. I'd love to sort of hear how you came to this and how you came to on your journey to decide adoption was the right path for you.
Well, I'll start by what you were just talking about. My family was not necessarily what people would call standard. I came from a single mother household. My parents were married, but my dad was also a jazz musician. So he traveled a lot and his career was priority. And so my mother had to make her home with me and with the support of her brothers and sisters as she put herself through um, a 2-year college, then on to a 4-year college, all the way to get her PhD in divinity. So, I come from an interesting group of family members who have really made it their goal to help the family within each other, like on one side of the family. The other side of the family was very distant. I didn't have a relationship with them, but I learned my sense of family and home from my mother and from her brothers and sisters and all of my cousins. And it still is what I yearn for as an adult, is that same feeling when we were younger, when everyone came to each other's houses and it was, you felt so much pride when you can say your cousin. I grew up as an only child, so I couldn't say my brothers or sisters, but my cousins were my brothers and sisters. Um, and I grew up in New York City, which is unique unto itself. A lot of people wonder what it's like to live in a place like that. And it was wonderful until it wasn't for me anymore. And I felt like I had to leave, not only for my own sanity, but also because my family had grown to, I had become an adoptive mother.
Mhm. So let's touch on that a little bit. I'll carry on your journey a little bit. I know reading your bio, there was some flirtations, or more than a flirtation, with Hollywood, and some career aspirations there that you changed because of the journey that you took. Do you want to just sort of touch on that a little bit for us?
Sure. So I became an actress in college, very small parts and jobs just locally. It was my college job. Some people work in the bookstore. I did little jobs around town in Boston for different companies and became really in love with the whole world of acting. But I was at school on a scholarship and getting my BA and my MBA within 5 years on this great scholarship. And I had this incredible opportunity over the summer of my junior year, I believe it was, where I worked for a Broadway theater company. And I stumbled into this huge acting job and met people who took me under their wings. And I just fell in love with acting that summer. And I declared to my mother that I wasn't going back to school. And thankfully, she prevailed and said, no, let's work out a deal. You'll go back, you'll get this degree. And after that, you can do whatever you want with acting. I'll give you 5 years, so to speak. And I did that. And I was working immediately right after school. In fact, the week before I finished my last set of classes, I had booked a children's show. And so it was validation that this could happen. So I've been an actor for over 30 years now, I believe, and I the story you're talking about is when I had an incredible opportunity on a comedy show by one of the top comedians at the time, and they kind of pulled a fast one on me. The audition was very straightforward and improvisation aspect to it, and they said, "Oh, we can't give you the script because it's very top secret, but we'll give it to you afterwards, later." So when they did give it to me, it was when I was already at the table read to actually meet everyone, the producers, directors, the comedian himself, and um as I was reading the script, I said, "Oh my goodness, I can't do this. I can't say this and live with myself." So, long story short with that story is I walked off. I walked off the set and I didn't look back. And it was actually one of the first times that I started really knowing how much self-power I had over the decisions I made and not taking anything that was thrown at me and not feeling like I didn't have a voice or choice in how my life would play out. And I didn't want to live with regret for that moment. And that really informed how I moved forward with my decision to become an adoptive mom. I tried IUI, I tried IVF, I tried being in a relationship that would go to marriage. That didn't work. And so by the time I was at this really critical stage of fertility in my early 40s, I had no real choices left after the fertility treatments didn't work. So I decided to do adoption. And it worked, and it worked profoundly and has been amazing. And it's been a way for me to learn even more about myself because the adoption process is fraught with ups and downs and feeling pressure to take whatever baby comes along. You do have a choice. You can say no to situations. And so that acting situation as many years before it really did inform how I went through the adoption process, speaking up for myself, saying, no, this is not how I envision being a mother. So this situation is not going to work. This situation will. What I'm going to say on my brochures, um, all of those things that I stood up for myself. And so now, all these years later, I stand up for my clients. I'm an adoption doula, I like to say, and I help them find their voice through the adoption process. And it I'm not acting, but it's not my priority at the moment.
Mhm.
I'm really focusing on my coaching.
Sure. And so talking a little bit more about that process, what was the process like for you? I suppose, really interested to hear a little bit about that because again, I think probably people have I probably do. I'm talking for myself, a conceived idea of kind of what adoption is and how that process works. I'd be really interested to understand how that process was for you and kind of what are some of the, I suppose, kind of myths or kind of preconceptions that people have about the process.
Right. So it's not unlike buying a house, and it sounds crude, but there's a ton of paperwork and there's a lot of processes that can't be overlooked, that you can't jump around. And you work with somebody who is helping you through the process. So if you're buying a house, you have a mortgage broker or a mortgage banker. If you're adopting a baby, you're working with a social worker or an agency to navigate the adoption process, to fill out the right paperwork in the right order, get the fingerprints, send them off to DC, get them approved by Homeland Security. You are providing all of your financial details, including your tax returns and your insurance documents. I mean, it's very intense. And so I always tell people don't get offended by all the questions and how much information they want from you. It's part of the process, right? You either fight it or you just go with it. And you will get frustrated because documents will expire. Hopefully, your home study doesn't expire. A home study is valid for a certain amount of time, and then you would have to have a small redo. But generally, it's a lot of hurry up and wait and be picked. And so that was my process. That was exactly what I went through. And it was frustrating not having someone to walk me through that
Mhm.
from an outside perspective, outside of the agency and the social worker. And so that's what I do for my clients.
Okay. Just kind of want to explore a couple of things around the concept of home with the process. Obviously, you mentioned previously around kind of the way you grew up in a single mother household, but with a much wider family kind of input as opposed into the way that you were raised and the way that kind of, that piece. In New Zealand, they have which is where I spent, 20 odd years of my life in multiculture, they have a concept called whānau, which is in a direct translation, that means family, but actually it's kind of a lot more complex than that. It's a real sort of deeper, more emotional, physical concept around an entire, 3 or 4 generations raising children together as part of a wider family network. And I've probably butchered that meaning a little bit, and I try to be as respectful as I can, but it's a really interesting concept that goes beyond perhaps the anglicized version of family that I would have grown up in, which is mum, dad, and then you have some cousins you might see at family events and maybe hang out with occasionally. It's not really that completely integrated family concept that the whānau is. I'd be interested to hear kind of from where you've gone or from what your background was in the way that your family was and to becoming an adoptive mother. How has that shaped your feeling of home and family?
So it's interesting. I told you about my experience as a young child growing up with all of my cousins around. We
Mm.
even went to the same camp, summer camp. Like we really felt like we took over the camp, and it felt amazing to be able to say, I know him, I know her, I know, and we were connected. Growing up, that was my reality. As an adult, because I had my children so late, so much later than all of my cousins, there are very few cousins that my daughter has. So I've had to make my additional family members out of friends. And that was one of the reasons why I moved from New York to Connecticut, because I felt so isolated in New York, and moving into suburban atmosphere. My daughter's school and her playmates' families become friends. And I was able to, as a realtor, bring some friends up from New York who wanted the same kind of escape of New York to Connecticut. So they have become my brother and sister. And their daughter is my niece. And, I have people like that I can fill in the gaps, because the family members that I grew up with are all over the US. They're not where I'm at. And so I miss that for my daughter. I miss that for her to have that kind of experience. And the funny thing is, many of her really good friends from school are also only children, right? So it's a little easier that way to be able to connect with families that have only children, girls, to to foster that kind of same home feeling for
Yeah, and
them.
I think that's becoming more common. And, if I look at now, my situation is different. My wife and I had a daughter last year. Now I'm 46. I was 45 when Lily arrived. So, an older father for the first time, and very much the same. We were both living in New Zealand, and I'm from the UK originally. My wife's from the US. And so we didn't have family. Now, I have a wonderful friend network, and our daughter had some health challenges when she was born. So that friend group, which is very much a family, did wrap their arms around us, and we were incredibly well supported and well looked after. But again, very similar, because we had Lily so much later in life. I've got an actual niece who is almost 30, and I've got my best friend in the world, his son and daughter. His daughter's 20, his son's almost 16. It's and that there I've considered them my niece and nephew since they were born. But that's not someone who's going to play with my 1-year old or 2-year old. So one of the decisions we made as a family was to move back to the US to be closer to family. My wife, Katie, she's got friends who've got young kids, and it's a network, and we've got actual family here, and we've been able to blend that in. And it does mean, and that's one of the reasons I started this podcast, is because that whole, you get this mindset of, home, that's where you live, but actually it isn't necessarily just that. It's the roots you put down, the networks you build, that whole kind of situation that you create for yourself becomes home. Really interested to see, how did you find sort of upping sticks with a young daughter, moving to another state? and kind of starting again. How did that kind of impact the feeling of home for you?
I literally never thought I would leave New York.
Mhm.
I love New York that much. I loved my friends. I loved how I grew up, a diverse group of friends from all walks of life. I went to a very diverse school, high school, and literally my doubles partner was from Sri Lanka. I had a boyfriend who was Jewish. I had friends who were Greek. It was such a mishmash example of what New York City is. When I went to college, I was in for a little bit of a shock because I didn't get that. I thought Boston would be the same way, but you're at a smaller school, it's a business school. It was very New Englandy. So I actually had a bit of culture shock there, being, one of few Black women there, or Black students. And so I dashed back to New York to live after school. But then in my 30s, I started really getting tired of it. And certainly by my late 30s, I had been tired of living in a co-op. And if your viewers don't know what a co-op is, it's an apartment building where you have an apartment and you own it, but you only own shares of it, right? So you don't really own it. It's not real property. And living with nosy neighbors, and I found myself coming home every single day. And as soon as I crossed my threshold, all the energy and excitement that I felt before then just depleted. And so I realized after a few times of knocking my head against the wall, you got to get out of here. This is not where you're being fed. And I think a lot of times when you grow up in the same building, my mother lived in the same building, you know, there was this attachment. But when she passed away the same year I adopted, in fact, when she passed away, even more so, there was no reason for me to stay in New York. All of my extended family had gone except for my mother's sister. And so I had property in Connecticut and I said, well, you know what? It's empty. Let's go. Let's just try it out. And every time we came up for the weekend, I had a dog at the time who basically was my first child, literally, before my adoptive child came into my life. And the dog would go running crazy around. The baby was like all excited. She was excited anyway, and maybe she was even more excited because I felt like I could breathe and I didn't have four walls and didn't like my neighbors. So after doing that a couple of weekends, I was like, okay, what's the point of going back? Because as soon as I went back, that same feeling happened. And so although it took a while, the adjustment was super easy. I met friends. I'm living exactly what I want. And I have a group of friends, and my daughter has a group of friends that we can get together. It's just an easier lifestyle than big city living.
That's really cool. And I think, yeah, it's an interesting one when you make that move. It's often scarier than the outcome actually is. Um, Kind of sort of want to go back to the adoption piece with you for a little bit. Obviously, you're a proponent of open adoption. For those of people that may not understand the difference between closed adoption and open adoption, do you want to kind of just explain that a little bit and kind of why you chose
Sure.
the open adoption path?
Well, I would say right about now, almost every adoption is open unless there's some really strange extenuating circumstances. Back during my mother's times, when people were boomers, that age group, there was shame about getting pregnant outside of marriage. And, the woman went away and had the baby, and there was a convent involved or something like
Mhm.
that, or a home for girls. And then there would be this adoption that would happen in secret with no information passed about who the person was, circumstances, all of that. That's a closed adoption. And open adoptions, when you do know who the birth parents are, when you do know the circumstances, that's open. Now, most people today have a semi open because, yes, they know the information about the birth parent, but they don't have a relationship with the birth parent. So that's what I call an open adoption. When I actually have a relationship with the birth family that is including not just them, it's me and the adoptive child. And we obviously have the child in common. We have the child's well-being in common. And so by being able to have conversations with them, to be respectful and have this open exchange, obviously not every situation is going to open itself or lend itself to an open adoption. And I'm not saying that they're in your life 24/7 and, you speak to them every day. If that is your situation, if you worked up to that, then great. That would be the ideal, but you don't have to. But again, it's all about having an open dialogue available with the birth family without shame, fear, or regret. And then there's also the part that's so crucial. In your home, you have to have an open dialogue with your child,
Yeah.
letting them know that they are adopted. It would be the worst experience for that child to not know that they're adopted when everybody else in your world knows that they're adopted. And then it's a ticking time bomb when someone drops it on them and they're not emotionally equipped or ready to hear it. You should always be the one that starts that conversation. So that's how I like to explain what open adoption is. It's with having a relationship with the birth family, but also being open with your child about how your family came to be.
Yeah. And how have you managed that with your daughter? How have you sort of managed that conversation as she's got older and perhaps her understanding of what that means changes?
It's funny because people go, why would you tell her she's adopted? I'm like, well, why wouldn't I tell her she's adopted? That's exactly what she is. She's adopted. I couldn't have a child. And God granted this put me together with this woman who picked me to be her mother. So the conversation just started when she was very young, maybe about 2 or 3. Reading to her, reading books about adoption, showing that this is another child who's come to their family through adoption. The baby, you didn't grow in the mommy's stomach, but that you are just as loved as if you were. And it wasn't anything that was weird or strange because she doesn't know any different. It's just, okay, it's a great story. And I'm the same way. Oh my goodness. Wow. And you put love around the story, you put love around how you came to be and joy and grace. And it just becomes an amazing reality.
Oh, that's a lovely way of framing it. I really like that. In terms of the the adoptee parents, I may not get the terminology
The
right
birth
there.
parents,
Birth parents,
like
there we go.
me, the adoptive.
Um,
Okay, the birth
in
parents,
terms
yes.
of their involvement and how that interacts into your home life and kind of, I'd be really keen to just sort of understand, you sort of mentioned you have an open relationship with them. How does that kind of shape your daughter's upbringing or your daughter's perception of home, do you think?
I think it makes her feel so comfortable. So, someone actually one of my then friends, brought to the hospital a big bear and for my daughter, and she got it from the hospital gift store. And I said, oh, why wouldn't it be great if I got the same bear and gave it to the birth mother, and then there would be a connection. And so I just gave it to her and I said, when you look at the bear, you can think about your daughter who also has the same bear. There's that connection. And I really didn't give it much thought beyond that. And then when we finally had the opportunity to meet, which was several years later, I think my daughter was about 3 or 4. Um, I don't know what my daughter was perceiving, but she kind of knew. And I wish I had like a tape recorder in my brain to go back to that moment. But what I can say is after she met her birth mother that day, she started calling that bear, the same bear that they had together, by her birth mother's name. She, on her own, renamed the bear to her birth mother's name. Amazing.
That's really,
Amazing. Right?
and I think that's what I really like about that is how normal It is, and I think we as human beings sometimes definitely overcomplicate things or feel like we need to hold things back in terms of the knowledge that we share, perhaps because of how we think other people might react or, because of any perceived stigma. And I just love how normalized everything is in the way that you spoke about that and talked about that. What advice do you give to people wanting to do that journey and having maybe some trepidation around those sort of reactions or feelings?
I think it just starts with having a conversation. Even just today, I had a conversation with someone who was telling about her son and his wife who were having problems conceiving. They had gone the fertility route, but he already had children. And it didn't work, so that's it. And just but she kept saying, "I think they're done with that." I said, "Well, why don't you have a conversation with them?" Instead of thinking, it's okay to ask people this. You're not asking it in an intrusive way, but you can just say, "Hey, you know what? I saw this amazing woman talking about adoption and how it changed her life and how she works with women and it has changed their life. Did you ever think about this? Or, here, let me send you this clip." Just something that opens the door to have a conversation. And I find that if we stop trying to protect each other and just have really adult conversations that are heartfelt, we would be in such a better place as a society. But we have all these conversations in our minds about what they're going to say, how they're going to react. We're going to offend them. I don't want to make them sad. And it's like we're human beings. We have all these emotions and it's up to us to work through them. And hopefully you're talking with somebody who can make that conversation a little easier to have. And so I would say if you're having that desire to be a mom, whether you're single or a couple, reach out to me. I have a website called openadoptionsuccess.com, and you can reach me on different socials. I have literature and freebies that will help you walk through, is this really what I want? Is this my life non-negotiable? Which is what I always say motherhood was for me at that stage when I had that critical time to decide if I was going to be single for the rest of my life, if I, or not, I should say, a mother without being a mother. I'm going to start that again. Um, I had a critical time at that age to decide if I'm going to stay motherless. Even I might marry later on, but that time of being able to birth a child was gone. Did it matter if I didn't birth the child? Could I still love another human being as if it was mine? And when I asked myself all these different questions, the answer was absolutely. I didn't need to see myself replicated in a smaller human being and see my features. My desire to be a mother was from a nurturing standpoint, not of I need to see a mini me. And so if that is your life non-negotiable to be a mother, then do it. By all means, figure out how you're going to do this.
Thank you so much for that. And I will absolutely include a link to the website in the show notes so people can access that resource because I think it's incredibly valuable for people who are kind of considering kind of those, what do I do? So obviously besides visiting the website and using the resources and engaging you, what are the sort of the first steps that people should take if they're about to start this journey?
Yeah. I have a great questionnaire that I give all of the people that I work with before they start. And it's just a simple questionnaire. There's no right or wrong answers. It's just to prompt a conversation with yourself. Is this what I can do? Am I financially secure to do this? Do I have a network of people that can come around and support me? Um, do I have the kind of job that will support me being a single mother? Do I need to change that job? All these different questions. And so, again, there's no right or wrong answer, but with those answers, you can decide where you need to make changes and what your timeline is. Do you want a boy? Do you want a girl? Can you, as a single woman, become the mother of a child who has physical needs, like physical ailments and stuff like that. These are real questions. And some people are equipped for that, and then others will not. So, again, it's really taking the time to craft your own story as to how you envision your journey to motherhood. From there, do your research, go online, see what adoption agencies are out there, what their requirements are, find out how much it costs. And then I would say, don't wait much longer, right? Your 40s and 50s, we have a lot of wisdom that we can share with our younger children, our children. We have a lot more patience generally. We have a lot more resources, but time is still not on our side, right? And so you want to have children while you're still young. You want to get in shape and be healthy as well, so you can be there for the long haul. So all of those things, it's just a matter of before you get overwhelmed and then you go, forget it, I can't do it. Have a conversation, find someone who can walk you through the process and be your cheerleader and be the person in your ear giving you the right encouragement and advice.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I've really loved having you on, Io. It's been a really lovely conversation and a really inspiring journey. So thank you so much for that. I've really, really appreciated your time. Thank you everybody for listening to this week's episode of Wherever I Lay My Hat, which is very much a podcast about home, but as you can see today, those conversations can be quite different, which is really, really exciting and like really reassuring a lot of the time as well. So I've loved that. Again, as I said before, this is a show about your stories. So if you're interested in taking part, please email me at dan@whereverIlayMyhat.com, and I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much, and tune in again next week.